I'm your host, Alina Pantera, and today we have a very special guest, a very good friend of mine, and a wonderful author. She's Dr. Tasha Mansfield, a medical psychologist, and a woman who is multi-talented, and among her many talents, she has just written a book that I'm crazy about, and it's called When God Talks Back, Madness or Mysticism. And actually, when I was walking into a store just recently, I saw the book, and I said, oh my God, I have been led directly to When God Talks Back. And so I welcome you, Tasha. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So tell me a little bit about what happens when God talks back.
Oh gosh, I think we have to start from the beginning here.
Let's start from the beginning.
Let me tell you how this book came about, really. I have to give you a little bit of personal background.
I love personal background. We all love personal background.
I was a very psychoanalytic, very Freudian, very scientifically oriented, research-oriented medical psychotherapist. I'd been in the field for 20 years at the time, actually.
Now, what is a medical psychotherapist, so that our audience knows?
It's basically, it's a psychotherapist that works primarily with people with medical problems. Primarily. It wasn't exclusively, but the vast majority of my practice at that time was in oncology, cancer and AIDS patients, and people with all kinds of chronic and catastrophic illness.
So you're in a very serious side of psychotherapy. You're dealing with people that are at a very big edge, spiritually and physically.
Yes. Well, it's usually a very major crisis in their life, but sometimes out of those crises come fabulous growth spurts. So it was wonderful work, and people are very, very motivated at that time in their life, you know, to really find meaning and purpose, because many of them are facing life-threatening illnesses. So at this time, this is what I was doing. And it was wonderful work, but I was really personally into a workaholic, high-stress, single parent.
Nobody can relate to this.
You know, right? You know, pursuing the American dream on that fast track, you know, ego-driven, success, career. I was really very invested in all of those things. I come from a background of a wonderful family, but was born into a Jewish family, wonderful family, but was raised with absolutely no religious training, no religious background, no spirituality whatsoever. So here I am at this stage in my life, and I guess if I was going to have to label myself, I would label myself almost an atheist. I had no interest.
A driven atheist.
I had no interest. I was very busy with other things. I had no interest in spirituality. I had no interest in really finding out about God, or is there a God, or asking these questions. I was very much into...
So the New Age had not touched you whatsoever. You were just...
Well, I was a hippie in the 60s, but, you know, that really doesn't count, because that was more political, actually.
I can see that.
Yes, I was a political activist. But you know what? In retrospect, I think my political activism was really a search for meaning and purpose in my life. And I didn't know it at the time. But I was just this angry feminist, and I was involved in the feminist movement and the civil rights movement and protesting against the war and all these things that I thought were so noble, and they were, and we did help change the world, that era, at that time. But so here's the sort of background. So I was literally just sort of, as they say, walking down the street, minding my own business, and one day, all of a sudden, I started hearing a voice. Now, I can't...
Now, just a minute.
Okay, we'll stop.
We have to stop because people go, and there she is, this fabulous person, and she's hearing a voice. Already, you think, oh, she's having a nervous breakdown.
Well, I certainly did.
You had a nervous breakdown, or you thought you were having a nervous breakdown?
I certainly thought I was having a nervous breakdown. Because if a...
Where's the voice coming from? That's another thing we need. Because people ask me this all the time. Is the voice inside your head? Is the voice outside your head? Is it coming through a loudspeaker? What's going on?
Yes. Mine was, and the only way I can describe it is sort of a telepathic communication. But at the time, again, I want to kind of go back to the experience of it. So here I am, a person with no... Well, I had... My only belief systems were scientific and psychoanalytic. So we have, psychologists and psychiatrists have a book called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And in this book, right, is every disorder, every psychological disorder known to man, and there's a code for every one. Okay, so that's all I knew. That was my training. So anything that's happening has to be in this book. This was my previous belief systems. Can you imagine? I was so
No, I mean, this can be very
so
frightening.
limited,
Even
yes.
for people who don't come from that, it would be very frightening. So for you, it
Yes.
must have been
Well,
terrifying.
the subtitle of the book is really the whole point of why I'm here and what I want to talk about today. Because the subtitle is Madness or Mysticism. And that's really the question. When someone has a mystical experience, a spiritual experience, a religious experience, is it psychopathology? You know, are they having a psychotic episode? Is this mental illness? Or, here's the differential diagnosis, that's what we call it, or is this a profound, profound mystical, religious, spiritual experience?
I know, because when you're
So-
praying,
Yes.
you pray, you speak to God, but when God speaks back,
Yes.
what happens?
Yeah, so I think Lily Tomlin addressed that. And I wish I could remember her exact quote, but she made some very funny joke about that in one of her routines.
I remember that. It was on
Yes.
Broadway.
Right,
And so,
right.
so let's get back to this, because I know it's a very important part of everybody's life, because I think there's, like we've talked before, there's an awakening on the planet. And the fact that
Yes.
you're able to speak about it and come from such a profoundly medical and scientific background, that this happens to you is almost an indication that Spirit really wants to move through you, and that you're able to bridge both worlds. So you're back in this moment, and you have a voice speaks to you. And what does the voice say?
But Spirit wants to move through everyone. That's
Right.
the point. And after this happened, I went into my research mode, and I started interviewing people and collecting data, and there are tens and thousands of people. And since I've been on this book tour since October, I have never spoken to a group of people on my book tour that there hasn't been at least a third of the people in the room at any size of people who you know, all raise their hands when I ask, that have had some kind of profound experience. Now,
But
psychologists...
most people are very scared to talk about
That's the point, and that's why I'm here today, because
Right.
I want to talk about it, and I want this to be something where people are not in the closet with their
it.
experiences.
And bless your heart for doing it, because you're doing such a service for people.
Yes. Let me define mysticism. Can I do that? Because people
Absolutely.
say, you know, what exactly is that? Mysticism is the nature and development of spiritual consciousness. So all it means is that we experience our true nature. We experience our true selves. See, we really live in duality all the time. We have two aspects of ourselves. We have our spiritual side, and we have our conditioned personality. And both are important. We have to have both. But which one are we expressing in the majority of the day? So what happened to me was, for some unknown reason to this day I don't understand, is that something broke through my own soul, my own spirit, my own true essence, broke through that conditioned personality, and I had a profound opening and awakening and all kinds of visions and...
Well, bring it down, because I think
Yes.
this is really important.
Okay.
So an ordinary person is doing what seems an ordinary part of their life. And then they hear a voice. And the voice says what?
Well, I think...
Did the voice speak to you? or-
Yes.
And said...
Very directly. I think, you know, I don't mean to be evasive, but I think it's... I write about it so much more eloquently than I speak about it.
Read this book. Because actually, I was so impressed by the book. And I know that you would be so impressed by the description. And you are very articulate and very eloquent.
Thank you.
But, you know, because this has happened to me as well, and people don't have, I find, the vocabulary to explain it, and they're shy to explain it. I mean, if I say to you, Tasha, I heard a voice, and you're going to say, what did the voice say? And maybe the voice didn't say anything, or the voice gave you an opening, or suddenly you moved into a new dimension. And I think it's important to be able to say that so that people don't feel crazy, like you mentioned in the book.
Right, because I think if you go to most psychologists and psychiatrists and you say, I saw the Virgin Mary, I had an experience, you know, whatever happens. I mean, I hear this all the time. People tell me they see these things. Actually, on network television tonight, there's some program on about some kind of experience that there's a woman who claims to have the stigmata, and they're trying to scientifically prove this. But what
you can't scientifically prove
exactly,
everything.
exactly. You know, what I think science and spirituality are actually the same thing. We don't necessarily have the tools right at this moment in time, but I think eventually science is going to prove the existence of God and prove
Really?
absolutely.
That's a wonderful thought.
Absolutely, and prove the existence of the soul and prove these things. Because I believe we...
You're an optimist for sure.
Yes, I think it's just a matter of time. You know, if you think about 100 years ago when we developed the microscope, we didn't know that there was this whole microscopic world that we couldn't see. There's all these things all around us that we couldn't see with the naked eye. But then we developed the tools and we said, oh my goodness, there's this whole other world that now we have the tools to see. And as soon as
we're going to develop a spiritual microscope.
Exactly. And
or a telescope.
And what that is our own development. We will evolve and develop to the point that we will be able to perceive these spiritual realms, and science and spirituality will not be fragmented. It will be, I think, joined together, hand in hand.
It's a wonderful message. Getting back to you.
Okay.
How does this affect you then? So you look it up in the medical dictionary and you have no reference points for it, and then you say, oh my God, my whole life has opened up. And I know you say it beautifully in the book, but I want people to understand this so they want to read your book and they can feel more comfortable knowing what's happening in their lives. How did this affect you and what happened? You want to tell us about that?
My first experience was absolute terror, because my only frame of reference was I'm having a brief psychotic episode.
Yeah.
I didn't have another frame of reference. Well, maybe this is some kind of spiritual awakening or spiritual opening. Maybe this is angels talking to me. Maybe this is, and I like to just call them people, because I just see them as people that are sort of not in the physical world that do communicate with us at times, and in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be maybe as directly as I experience, but they communicate with us in a lot of different ways to all of us.
So here's this totally atheistic woman
Yes.
who now speaks about seeing angels or being around angels.
Yes.
and being very, see, what impresses me about you is that you say all that stuff about how you were, and now what I experience is this woman who is tremendously flowing in the presence of God, whose life is really devoted to getting this message. And that's an amazing transformation.
Astounding, but it was a slow one. This was not overnight. You know, it was, I got hit over the head.
So you didn't go just
No, because I struggled with my faith for years. And I think that, you know, now my faith is ironclad. I mean, it is so strong. And I think that took time to develop. And, you know, one of the things I wanted, you know, people talk about, again, on my book tour, one of the main questions people ask me, and this is the point is not having this profound epiphany.
Right.
That's not the point. The point is, people ask me, what does it mean to live a spiritual life?
Yes.
That's the point. And to me, living a spiritual life is utter sanity. So
What a wonderful phrase.
Spirituality
is utter sanity.
is utter sanity. It's living life as a soul and not living life from your emotions, from your conditioned personality, from what I call, you know, higher self and lower self. It's living life in your higher self and being aware of that and aware of who your higher self is and being in contact with that and living life from that place.
So that took a while for you, from the break to that, to really integrating that.
Yes, well, that's certainly a work in progress for all of us. I think that's
You're
a
not
lifelong...
finished?
No, that's a lifelong process. But the point is to be devoted to that process, you know, be devoted to developing as a human being, developing spiritually, developing, you know, to be the most loving human being that you can be. That's the Holy Grail.
So
That's
can
the
people
grail.
do that without having a spiritual awakening?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
how can they do that, Tasha?
I think you first have to have a yearning in your heart, you know, a really deep, deep yearning, and that yearning has
For
to
connection.
be... Yes, and for change.
And for change.
Yes, that yearning has to be profound in your heart, to know God, to know yourself, To me, they're one and the same thing. And that yearning...
And that's really an important
yes.
part, that they are the same thing.
Yes.
That you're not looking for God outside of you.
Absolutely not. Because we are, again, all I can do is share with you and your viewers, share my experiences and my belief systems and my opinions.
Well, that's what we want you to do.
But I believe that we are a fragment of the whole. So if who we are, our soul is a fragment of the whole body of God. So then, of course, we have access to that incredible, and my name for God that I use in the book a lot is universal mind.
Yes.
Because I see God as an unfathomable intelligence. But we are part of that. You know, we can have access. It's one of the things that happened to me during this experience. It was like plugging myself into the internet. I had this sort of access to random knowledge, and you know, I still, it's very hard for me to understand that on deep levels, but that's what happens. You know, when people say, I was inspired, and, you know, the great painters and the great musicians.
That energy goes through them.
Absolutely. They tapped in. That's what happened to them.
But then you tap in. So you're walking along,
Yes.
and your nervous system is not prepared for this kind of rush of energy that comes through that makes you see the unity of life, which was you would describe so beautifully in the book. And everything starts looking radiant and translucent, and what you feel is this overwhelming oneness and love. And afterwards, you get deposited back to regular reality. What did that do to your nervous system? What did that do physically to you? Because then you go into a very important part of the book that is very significant in terms of even your career of having worked in medical field. So would you like to share some of that?
It's sort of a cosmic joke, actually.
We love cosmic jokes. God has a great sense of humor.
Because I was right in the midst of working. I had a huge wellness center, and it was very successful. And the wellness center was devoted to chronic and catastrophic illness. Now, I'm the doctor. I'm the helper, right? So all of a sudden, I developed a very serious chronic and catastrophic illness. So the joke was on me. I can look back now.
You were prepared for that.
Well, you know, it's really...
You're never prepared for it.
I had such an opportunity to practice what I preach because, you know, when I went through that, my faith was tested. I got to experience what Job in the Bible, if anybody knows, which we won't have time to go into that, but if anybody knows the story of Job.
Infinite patience and infinite trials and tribulations.
The patience of Job is what I had to have, and that illness was what really solidified my faith, believe it or not. Through the suffering and through the pain and suffering of it is what propelled me into living the devout life that I lead now. It was actually via the illness. So I really...
So the illness stopped everything for you?
I lost everything.
I think this is really important too.
I was completely disabled.
Highlight.
Lost my practice, lost all my finances, lost my health, lost many of my friends because, you know, I wasn't able to function or go out or keep up with anything. So it was...
So I know that you say in the book that they couldn't find out what was wrong with you.
They didn't really know. It was some kind of bizarre immunological disorder, but I went to doctor after doctor and flew here and flew there looking for answers, and no one knew what was wrong with me. And I was quite disabled for 2 years.
Because I know that any of the viewers that have gone through this will be so renewed by hearing the message of hope that happened to you. Because here you get the most amazing experience of oneness with God.
Yes.
And then, immediately thereafter, boom.
Yes. It was like climbing to the top of this mountain.
And going to the bottom.
And then being thrown into the blackest pit.
And that's where you solidified the faith.
And yes.
Not when you were on top of the mountain.
No.
Isn't that amazing?
The top of the mountain was the glimpse. That was the glimpse.
That would sustain you.
That I got. And that did sustain me. And one of the things that was told to me, and I will, because this is all through the book, one of the things that was said to me was, and I didn't understand this at the time because I had never read the Bible or I had never read any kind of religious literature, but what was said is, keep the light even in the darkness.
What a wonderful message. Keep the light even in the darkness.
Even in the darkness. So when I was in my dark night of the soul, if you know that, again.
And in
Saint
fact, I
John of the
love
Cross,
that.
yes.
Tell people what the dark night of the soul is. It's a wonderful phrase, but a very terrifying experience for
Yes.
anyone who's gone through it.
Well, I'm sure, I don't think anyone gets through this life unscathed. I think everyone has a dark night at some point in their life. I don't see how you can live a life and not experience that at some point. The dark night could be psychological, emotional. I have so many people in my office that go through that. It could be physical. It could be both. It could be
But it's a time when
suffering,
you can't
tragedy.
find God, right?
Can't find meaning and purpose in life. And that's the dark night, that you lose contact with your source, you lose contact with yourself, and you cannot find the meaning and purpose in life. And it is a very, very dark night.
So I know that so many people feel that way, and then they go to a regular doctor or a psychologist, and they say, well, you're depressed and you need Prozac or whatever. And you're saying that sometimes these profound dark nights are the passageway to your soul.
Absolutely.
And that it's important. And this is very important to me because I have a lot of friends of mine whom I think are going into spiritual emergence, like you were, and spiritual crisis, and the regular medical model does not give them the flexibility for that. So how did you do it? And what would you say that people need to do when they're going through the dark night of the soul?
That's a very individual journey, Alina. You know, everyone has to find their way. So there's not one pat answer, you know, well, do this and you'll be fine. I think the point is that you must go deeply inward and, you know, into yourself and try to make contact with yourself and your source. And there the answers will be found.
But there is an answer. Go inside yourself.
Absolutely.
And that you believe that we all have the answers inside. And to make that contact, so do you recommend people pray, people sit by themselves, solitude, all of that?
I think it's very important. I have some things in the back of the book, some exercises and practical suggestions. But I think there's several, you know, again, I have sort of, you know, what's a healthy life? You know, what's a healthy spiritual life? And even if we're very busy and we have family and children and work and all these things, we must make time for certain things. These are, to me, mandatory things.
It's important. They're mandatory.
They're mandatory.
They're mandatory.
I feel, my opinion,
yes,
to live a healthy life. And that is a certain amount of...
Well, that's what we all want, to live a healthy life.
Yes. And you know, what is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is peace of mind.
Right.
You know, if you have peace of mind, nothing else matters. If you have financial problems and peace of mind, what difference does it make,
through, right?
If you have illness but you have peace of mind, you know, it's okay. You know, we don't have to be happy about our circumstances necessarily, but if we have peace of mind, we can get through them. So I think the mandatory things are three things. I think meditation, again, it doesn't have to be any kind of Eastern meditation. It's just quiet time with yourself.
Right.
It doesn't have to be anything.
That's such a wonderful thing that you say.
Yes.
Quiet time with yourself.
Yes. Where you remove all distractions, all noise, and every day, a certain amount of quiet time with yourself and a certain amount of solitude, which is hard for people to find when they have families and children and they say, I don't have a moment of privacy.
You can get in the bathtub, close the door.
Make the time, absolutely.
Right.
You know, if whatever you have to do.
Right.
You know, lock the door.
Go in the
that
closet.
Time, yes. So that time for meditation, solitude, and prayer, to make contact with yourself and contact with your source at least once a day, I think is crucial to have any kind of quality of life and peace of mind.
So you said 3 more or 2 more?
No, that's pretty.
Oh, those are the ones.
Solitude, meditation, and prayer.
Great. And so now, what are your plans?
Oh, my goodness. Well,
I know, because this is such a terrific book. And
yes.
I want to say one more time that I can't recommend it enough. You can get it at local bookstores and all over and through the internet. When God Talks Back, Is It Madness or Mysticism? And I like to read it when I start thinking that anything might happen like that to me. And it's so soothing. I think you've integrated your life so much that when people are around you, they feel it.
Oh, thank you.
And I want to thank you so much for coming to the show. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your message. And it is my deepest hope, and I know it is yours too, that the viewers and everyone who comes in contact with this message will be enriched by it and supported by it to lead a spiritual life.
Thank
So
you.
thank you again, Tasha.